Introduction to EQ and Filters.
V-Gates, how goes it? I'm Chris Presnell, and this is the Mix Repair Guy channel. This video is an introduction to filters and the various types and styles of EQs. We'll talk about some issues each style of EQ is good at solving. Let's get into it.
The audio spectrum. To understand equalization, we need to understand the audio spectrum first. It's like a map that shows you where every frequency range lives. Many EQ plugins have a built-in spectrum analyzer, which shows you both frequencies and their levels of your track. This is helpful to visually spot a frequency you're hearing that you want to make louder or softer. The ideal human hearing range is from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz, or 20 kHz. As we age, that range narrows, and we're most likely to notice the loss of high frequencies. That's why it's so important you avoid loud noises in life. I can't stress this enough. Always wear hearing protection when exposed to loud volume. Frequencies in the audio spectrum are not linear. They're logarithmic. What does that mean? It means for every octave the sound goes up in pitch, the frequency doubles. For example, 200 Hz is 1 octave up from 100 Hz, and 20,000 Hz is 1 octave higher than 10,000 Hz. Except for sine waves, most audio is comprised of a fundamental frequency as well as harmonics, which are multiples of the fundamental. Harmonics are usually quieter the further they get from the fundamental frequency. It's the balance of all the harmonics which combine to make a timbre. These harmonics are what make a piano sound different from a violin and make one singer sound different from another. There are well-known groups of frequencies that can help you use EQ. Sweetwater Sound has a great chart in their website which lists many common instruments and ranges for boosts or cuts with a description of each range. There's another great chart at mastering.com. Their chart shows what happens when there is too little or too much of any frequency. Now that you have some background, let's talk about the tools you have available with EQ. What is a filter? A filter is an audio circuit or software algorithm that can boost, pass, or cut a range of frequencies. The most common filter I use are high-pass filters. They allow frequencies higher than the cutoff frequency to pass, while progressively cutting frequencies below the cutoff. They can also be called low-cut filters and rumble filters. Use a high-pass to reduce low-end rumble from sources like mic handling noise, vibration through the mic stand, or traffic. This is so common that many microphones and mic preamps have a switchable high-pass filter built in. When you move a cardioid mic very close to a source, like a guitar speaker, you encounter the proximity effect. That's where the lows boost the closer the mic is to the source. A high-pass filter can be used to address that. A low-pass filter does the opposite. They allow frequencies to pass that are lower than the cutoff frequency. Since they progressively cut frequencies above the threshold, they can also be called high-cut filters. This type of filter can be helpful to reduce unneeded high-frequency content in a track. If a track is too bright, harsh, or sibilant, a low-pass filter can help. With instruments like electric guitar, there can be high-frequency information that just isn't needed or interferes with other tracks. A low-pass filter will get rid of that excess top end. High and low-pass filters are usually measured by how many decibels they reduce per octave. Typical settings are multiples of 6, like 6, 12, 18, or 24 decibels per octave. A high-pass filter that reduces at 6 dB per octave means for every octave below the cutoff frequency, you reduce the level by another half. When you increase the slope to 12 or 18, the slope angle increases, so the cutoff is a bit more drastic. Some filters can take this to an extreme and won't allow any frequencies beyond the cutoff frequency of the filter. This is called a brick wall slope and isn't needed as often. The width of the frequencies a filter or EQ band will change is known as Q. What are the popular types of EQ? Equalizers usually fall into one of a few categories: graphic, parametric, or semi-parametric. A graphic EQ is built into my old home stereo and has several sliders for each band. The slope of the bands is bell-shaped, and the frequency of each band is usually fixed. There's usually no way to change the Q or the width of each band either. When all the sliders are at 0, the band is neutral and neither boosts nor cuts. When you move a slider positive, that increases the frequencies around that band. Move it negative, and that band decreases in volume. A parametric EQ has 3 controls per band: frequency, level, and Q. If any band in an EQ lack any of these 3, then that's called semi-parametric EQ. Parametric EQs usually have far fewer bands than graphic EQs, but you have more control over the EQ curve since you can widen one band to cover what might take you 10 bands for a graphic EQ to dial up. Plus, parametric EQs can get in between the hardwired frequency bands of a graphic EQ. Many EQs have a combination of fully parametric and semi-parametric bands. In addition to the common bell curve, there are many other common slope shapes. High shelves let you boost or cut everything above the center frequency. Low shelves let you boost or cut everything below it. Home and car stereos with simple bass and treble controls are examples of fixed frequency shelving EQ bands. There are many other slope shapes like notch and tilt, but we've covered the most common, which most vintage hardware EQs use. How do I know what to adjust? First, do some critical listening. Make notes if you like. Try listening for frequencies that stand out in a bad way. Decide whether tracks are too bright, too dark, too booming, or too thin. Presets might be a good starting point and may help you learn some favorite frequencies the pros like to tweak. That doesn't mean it will work for you since the pros didn't have your exact gear and room when they recorded. Remember, every track is different. Once I've gotten an idea of what's out of whack, I'll usually start by getting rid of the bad and the ugly. That usually means cuts, and usually with a narrow Q. I'll use a technique called sweeping the frequencies to find the offensive tone. Let's say you wanted to reduce a nasty ringing frequency from a snare. Start with a bell-shaped parametric EQ band and set its Q to fully narrow. Next, max out the gain for that band. You may want to turn down your volume a bit for this, because it can get ugly. Finally, sweep the frequency back and forth until that annoying sound gets far more obnoxious. Rock the knob back and forth until you find the exact center of the nasty frequency. Now that you've found it, just widen the Q a little bit and bring the gain down so it's cutting instead of boosting. It'll take your ears a moment to get used to the fix since you were just hearing a very skewed and nasty version of the track. You might want to bypass the EQ for a moment and listen dry to acclimate your ears back to normal. Then engage that EQ and cut until the frequency no longer offends. If you cut too much, it will sound weird or hollow, so don't cut too much. It's not uncommon to have to cut more than one frequency, but try not to get carried away. Each band you add can change the phase of the track in a bad way, so don't overdo it. Once you've squared away the nasty bits, it's probably time for sweetening, and that can be done with gentle boosts. Sweeping isn't usually as helpful here since you don't want to boost a small range. I like to use a wide Q with a slight boost, then rock the frequency around until I've added what I want, like air, presence, clarity, warmth, or thump. Tweak the gain until it's balanced and move on. Here's another way to look at EQ and balance. What happens when you reduce the lows in the track with a shelving EQ band? Once you compensate for the level loss with more gain, you've done the same job as if you had boosted the mids and highs. Here's the opposite example. When you boost the lows, you're doing the same job as reducing the mids and top. Again, that's after you tweak the gain to compensate. Keep this in mind when using EQ and try to avoid complicated EQ curves. Try to keep the band count to a minimum. Less can be more when using EQ bands. If you need a lot of EQ bands to fix a track, then you probably need to change the signal chain and re-record. The best EQ you can do is by moving the mic position relative to the source or the room. That bears repeating. The best EQ is to move the mic. Always try that first whenever you can. If that doesn't help, then swap the mic with a different one. Not even the most expensive mics are perfect for every source, and every room is different. You won't know until you try, so if you only have 2 mics, swap them out and see if it helps. If you have more than one type of mic preamp, swap that next, and so on until you find a signal chain that sounds best with what you have. At the very least, you'll learn the different tonal qualities of both your gear and locations in your room. Common frequencies. There are a few frequencies I find myself tweaking the most. First on my list has to be the mud frequencies, especially for electric guitars. Most of the time for a guitar, that sits around 300 Hz. There's almost always a narrow 300 Hz cut on my hardware EQs. For other sources, the mud frequency can be as low as 100 Hz or as high as 450. This is also the same range as warmth, so don't take out too much or don't use too wide of a cut. Too little in this range and it can sound thin or hollow. Next up is the boxy range. Depending on the source, it can be from 350 to 550 Hertz. Start around 350 if you're dealing with a boxy vocal track. Speaking of vocals, if you're dealing with a nasal or honky vocal, do a cut anywhere from 500 to 1200 Hertz. And for sibilants, cut somewhere between 3.5K and 10K. Another great range is from 1K to about 8K. When you add the right amount, this range can give you presence and definition. Add too much and it can sound harsh, tinny, or sibilant. Not enough and it can sound distant, dark, or boring. There's a nice range in the top end from about 8K on up. Not enough and your track will sound too dark and dull. Just enough will add nice air and brightness to a track. Take it too far and it'll be piercing and brittle. There are some bands where a particular piece of classic gear can work magic for certain instruments, but that will be for another video. Next time. On our next few videos, we'll look at some famous EQs used by the pros and find out how and when they're used. I'll talk about frequency settings in some vintage gear that are great for specific instruments. We'll delve into plug-in emulations of historic gear like the classic Pultec EQP-1A and the Neve 1073. There are many software authors that offer great emulations for free. Search for free EQ plugins using your favorite search engine. As with all software, be sure to read reviews to verify the plugin is from a legitimate company. Also, be sure to download directly from the publisher's website, not from some random downloading website that pops up in your search results. The last thing you need is malware on your computer. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel and don't forget to tell your friends. Most of all, try to learn something new every day and have a great time doing it.